about to say something that I haven't said in a really, really long time. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid, the show where I take a look at the wonderful, wacky world of LGBTQIA++ news, because stupidity is intersectional. So yeah, I took quite a big break from making dedicated YouTube videos, as a lot of you can tell, but a couple of weeks ago I saw footage of a protest in central London, and I saw that one of the speakers for this trans rights protest was an adult baby. And so I kind of just thought that, these people,
they're not sending their best.
And so, why don't I throw my hat back into the ring to actually talk about this stuff? Because, let's face it, there's not many views out there like the ones which I have anymore. And I can't complain about it if I'm not putting my voice out there. So the first story that I want to talk about this week involves this guy here. Now, if you're a viewer of mine, you're gonna know exactly what this is about without even knowing the story. Jailed Minnesota mosque bomber now identifies as a woman and says gender dysphoria drove her to attack. Now, just to make it clear throughout the rest of the piece, I'm going to refer to him with male pronouns because he's a man. A right-wing militia leader facing life in prison for orchestrating the 2017 Minnesota mosque blast in the United States now identifies as a woman. Emily Claire Harry, the 50-year-old leader of the group White Rabbit, who was previously known as Michael Harry, alleged that a combination of gender dysphoria and right-wing misinformation fueled his inner conflict during the time he was convicted for bombing the Dar Ali Farouk Islamic Center. He has requested the judge to legally acknowledge his transgender identity. In the official court documents, Harry's attorney, Shannon Elkins, wrote that he was living a double life and had planned a trip to Bangkok and Thailand for sex reassignment surgery. She wrote, he strongly desired to make a full transition, but knew he would be ostracised from everyone and everything, unlike being a mosque bomber. Thus, as he formed a ragtag group of freedom fighters or militiamen and spoke of missions to Cuba and Venezuela, Harry secretly looked up sex change, transgender surgery, and post-op transgender on the internet, doing it all secretly so nobody would know. Great. Elkins argued before US District Judge Donovan Frank to give Harry no more than a 30-year prison sentence instead of a life term. In November 2020, a federal jury convicted Harry after he was found guilty of all 5 counts relating to the bombing of the mosque. He was charged for damaging property because of its religious character, forcibly obstructing the free exercise of religious beliefs, conspiracy to commit felonies with fire and explosives, using a destructive device in a crime of violence, and possessing an unregulated destructive device. Now, it's very handy that Harry is transitioning in secret before he blew up a mosque, isn't it? But there's a couple of things that I kind of want to focus on with this story. The first of which is the weird claim about being trans after being locked up. Now, this isn't the rarest thing in the world, because I've seen a number of instances over the years where someone will be convicted of a crime, and it's only in the men's prison that they suddenly feel empowered to come out as a woman. How stunning and brave of them. But it kind of feels like they're just trying to grasp at something to get some leniency. In very, very rare cases, it kind of does work, but in the majority of time, hopefully common sense would just prevail, and people would notice that these are monsters who are just trying to get some sort of sympathy. And with the trans card being all the rage nowadays, part of you can't blame them for trying, but it's still easy for them to do that because of the whole mantra of anyone can be trans, you just need to say they are. So there's never any kind of skepticism when they make these claims. Now, what's also interesting with the story is the way in which The Independent wrote it. So they used female pronouns throughout and referred to Michael as a trans woman. And one of the reasons why they do that is because of pressure from activist groups when it comes to reporting on trans people. As I mentioned, the only thing that you really need in order to say that you're trans is just to say it. After that, you've got to respect the gender, you've got to respect the pronouns. That is what The Independent has done here. In fact, that's what a lot of media outlets do, due to activist pressure from groups such as Trans Media Watch and also Stonewall, who I'm going to be getting onto in a bit, by the way. Despite all this, I haven't really seen an outpouring of trans activists demanding that Michael be gendered and correctly, really. And it's kind of not surprising in one way because of how toxic this situation is. I mean, bear in mind, he was a right-wing extremist blowing up a mosque. A lot of progressives aren't going to rush to try and claim him as one of their own. But trans activists do like to enforce pronoun use even for monsters. I mean, just over the last couple of weeks, we've seen Chris Chan, who, for those of you who have never heard of him, he, just to kind of wrap it up in a quick sentence, he is a highly autistic man-child who is one of the most documented and cyberbullied people in history. And, you know, he came out as being a trans woman in 2014, and last month it was discovered that he had actually raped his mum, who likely has Alzheimer's. Now Chris is clearly a monster, but a lot of people were very much focused on how there was misgendering of Chris Chan. No, he's a woman. You must use she and her. Like, you know, what she did was horrible, but you've got to use her right pronouns. And this became a bit of a weird thing, and it's still a cause that a lot of activists like to latch onto, because this idea that misgendering people is one of the biggest crimes that you can do, because you're denying them their truth. You're denying them their humanity. And for a lot of these people, I just say, well, fine, we're talking about monsters here. I don't care about respecting the pronouns of someone like Jessica Yaniv or Karen White or this guy that we're talking about now, because they're monsters. Like, using pronouns really should just be about respect. You're never going to believe that every single person who is trans is actually the gender that they say they are. To say that that's not the case is to deny reality. So a lot of it is just going to be based on a respect basis. That's perfectly fine. And when it comes to people who are complete degenerates, people who are a threat to our society, basically a threat to life, I don't care about misgendering them. They're bad people. Like, it's not my morals to say that everyone needs to be gendered in the correct way. That's the mantra of a lot of trans activists who will fight tooth and nail for anyone to be, you know, correctly assigned the correct gender in society. But no, that's not the way in which I work. If you are a monster, if you are a thug, I'm under no obligation to use your pronouns. The likes of the Independents are only doing so in this instance because they know that they will get a barrage of hate from trans activists if they dared not to do it. And so all of this just comes down to policies that have been pushed by trans activists, and that's why people like Michael here are going to be referred to in the media as trans women and with the she and her pronouns. They might not be rushing to his defense, but it's certainly because of the policies that they have pushed that this is what's happening. Now, as I mentioned, I want to talk about Stonewall this week. They are an organisation which I've had quite a lot of interest in, and this year has kind of seen a little bit of a downfall for them. They run this thing known as the Diversity Champion Scheme, where they get a lot of employers to basically pay them thousands of pounds, complete like little tick boxes with all sorts of little exercises to show that they aren't hateful bigots, and then they'll be put in a list of which ones are the most tolerant and which ones just, you know, like, you know, they're turfs, they're nasty people, really. And yeah, a lot of companies have signed up to it in the past. They give out all this money, and every year Stonewall comes out with more and more ludicrous demands to kind of hit that top mark. And it especially exploded after 2015 when they took on trans issues. Now, a lot of the policies that they'll be asking for include things like pronouns in the emails, or adding, you know, like a gender-neutral bathroom. A lot of buildings can't actually do that because of their age. But Stonewall demands a lot. They demand that you pay a lot of money to them, and you put in a lot of money in your own organisation. A lot of this isn't needed. And a lot of companies over the last couple of months have kind of found that out. And so they're starting to pull away from Stonewall. The latest of which is Ofcom. Now, Ofcom is a kind of like a media regulator within the UK, according to the Groniad. Ofcom has announced its withdrawal from a diversity scheme run by LGBT plus charity Stonewall. The communications regulator said in a statement it is withdrawn from the Stonewall Diversity Champions programme because of the need to remain impartial and independent at all times, and because taking part poses a conflict or risk of perceived bias. The Diversity Champions scheme was launched by Stonewall in 2001 and has worked with a large number of organisations to promote diversity and make workplaces more inclusive for LGBT people. Other organisations, including the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Cabinet Office, have also quit the scheme in recent months, with the EHRC saying it didn't constitute the best value for money, and that's probably the reason why Ofcom pulled out as well. In fact, if you've seen Stonewall's policy, like it's simply a rip-off. But this is how Stonewall basically make their money nowadays. Since same-sex marriage was passed in 2015, Stonewall hasn't really had that big cause to kind of latch onto and really justify their existence. And with that being the case, they needed to latch onto the trans issue to, give them something extra to fight for. Now Stonewall's Diversity Champions scheme is a massive, massive rip-off for a lot of companies. And really, Stonewall rely on it so much because they don't exactly have the biggest cash flow outside of it and the various grants that they get from government organisations. In fact, after same-sex marriage was made legal in the UK, they didn't really have much of a fight to have anymore. I mean, at that time, Stonewall was pretty much exclusively LGB. They didn't have anything to do with trans people. And it was only kind of out of a point of survival that they embraced the trans agenda. And I think that's really important to remember when talking about Stonewall. They're not like highly infiltrated like people like to think. All of this is simply about them giving themselves a reason to exist. And with more and more of these companies pulling out of Stonewall's Diversity Champion scheme, and again, a lot of this is down to the money. They might say that they disagree with a lot of what Stonewall say, but there's going to be people in HR, they're going to have people in various employee groups who will be right on board with what Stonewall are saying anyway. But a lot of this is simply to save money, especially after such a difficult year because of the pandemic. Companies are going to be looking to save wherever they can, and Stonewall is a very easy saving for a lot of them to do. But one thing that Stonewall has done really, really well is basically make disagreement with them synonymous with being a bigot. If you have a look at Ofcom's statement on Twitter and some of the responses that they had afterwards, you can see that there's a lot of anger aimed at them just for not funding Stonewall anymore. That's all that's happened here. Looking at some of the prominent people who have responded, India Willoughby said, "Your decision to withdraw from Stonewall means you absolutely do not support the overwhelming majority of LGBT people in Britain. You've been bullied by a noisy bunch of fanatics, amplified out of all proportion by transphobic press. Disgusting." Technically Ron says, "Not sure bowing to right-wing internet trolls who create fake moral panic for headlines is avoiding the bias you think it is." And Amru Al-Qadi, oh God, I didn't even realise that was Amru until I looked at it. "You've capitulated to the moral panic of a deeply transphobic and homophobic movement in the UK, and that genuinely terrifies me as a queer content creator and consumer. And also as someone who hopes to live in a tolerant, respectful society, this is scary, scary decision." Again, all that's happened here is Ofcom has pulled out of funding Stonewall. That's it. They haven't said that they embrace gender critical thought. They haven't said anything about being against same-sex marriage. They have just pulled away from Stonewall. Now, they did mention in their statement that Stonewall has a lot of quite divisive positions, and they do. They really, really do. They have attitudes towards trans stuff, which I strongly disagree with. They have attitudes they barely even talk about lesbian, gay and bi issues anymore, which is why you had something like the LGB Alliance set up in the first place, because Stonewall kind of realises the money isn't there anymore. The money is where the trans activists want to push it, because that's where they can kind of make some little gains. So, but interestingly, the way everyone's worded it is simply disagreeing with them means that you are a bigot. And yeah, that is a bit of a coup for Stonewall. Simply disagreeing with them means you are a horrible, hateful person, and therefore you must have nefarious reasons. You must be trolled by the alt-right. You must be tricked by the media in order to hate trans people. They haven't made any statements like that. But ultimately, there's a lot that businesses can do without Stonewall's tick box anyway. what, like, they will ask you to do things like put pronouns in the bio or wear badges or rainbow lanyards and stuff. But what really trans people in particular need from a lot of their employers in the UK, if they offer health insurance, is to cover trans procedures on it. You know, surgeries, hormones, therapy, those kinds of things. Not many employers in the UK do it. And that's the kind of thing which I would rather employers be spending their money on if they want to help trans people, and not give it to Stonewall just so they could be in a list and potentially shamed for not being inclusive enough. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about this week is a relatively non-story, but there is something in there which I find a little bit interesting. It involves a pub in Scotland where a group of women who, you know, are gender-critical women who use the tagline, "Women won't weeshed," and weeshed means shush. It turned out that they were weeshed by a trans activist behind a bar. According to The Times, a leading pub chain has been dragged into a transphobia row after police were called to a city centre pub where bar staff complained of feeling threatened by the presence of a group of campaigners who oppose extending women's rights to trans people. Marion Miller, who is being prosecuted for allegedly posting transphobic social media posts, was asked to leave the Doctor's pub in Edinburgh with a group of fellow activists by a trans bar server who objected to her presence. Miller told The Times that she complied with the request to vacate the bar, which is owned by Green King, but Police Scotland said they were called to attend when a group of people refused to leave the premises. Miller said she had gone to the pub near Edinburgh University after a show at the Fringe to meet friends and fellow activists. So Miller and her friends said that they did absolutely nothing wrong in the pub, but according to the bar staff who effectively kicked them out, that's not the case. And so I just want to go through what they've said almost verbatim on Twitter. This person's she's now since locked her account. But this is what I've been able to find. "Mother of effing God, you'll never believe who I just had to kick out my bar. Literally TERFs. I had to call the police because they were making my bar staff and other customers feel threatened. Unfortunately, I should have kicked them out the minute they appeared. The whole bar team knew who they were from the start and asked me if I was comfortable with them. They didn't clock me, of course, till things escalated to the point of calling the police, so I said, sure. They were increasingly making my staff uncomfortable, and I decided for their safety and ease of shift to try to diplomatically ease them out by using the 2-hour per booking rule. My cis staff were finding TERF material in the toilets, and it felt really uncomfortable serving them. They refused to budge. It was fascinating seeing their level of entitlement and belligerence develop. The ringleaders started being arrogant and shouting at my staff till we all agreed the police would be the only way to remove them. Even then, they lied to the police. My staff had noticed some of them throwing evils at me, so by then they figured out I had to be trans or recognised me from Twitter. They didn't faze me because I'd kenned who they were, but my colleagues really despised their attitudes and even customers were complaining. I wish I'd refused them sooner, but I had the nerve idea to think TERFs could behave. It turned out that the dumbest judgment I've made in a long time. They're so entitled, they have a massive victim complex and think everyone else is at fault. Some customers asked what was happening, and I told them the same account I told the police. They were horrified, but thankful for me dealing with it in a way I'm trained. There are 2 infallible truths in bars. The bartender is always right, and the bartender can refuse service. So there's 2 things in here that kind of stand out as actual things which this group of women did. One is leaving pamphlets in a bathroom, and the other one is shouting at staff when asked to leave. But what's notable is that there isn't really any mention of them doing anything before that 2-hour period was up. And the reason why I just want to point that out is because if they went in there making people uncomfortable by, abusing members of staff, you would expect them to have been removed before the 2 hours. In fact, even the pamphlets they were leaving, if that was a big problem, they would have been removed beforehand. But it sounds like they didn't actually do anything until asked to leave, and that's kind of when the trouble arrived. But the way that this is being framed is that they were making people uncomfortable. But it just seems to be that they were made to feel uncomfortable because these women were in there. And it seems that there's only one trans member of staff and all the cis people in there were really, really uncomfortable on her behalf. It sounds a little bit weird. Now, maybe there is a lot more to this. Like I said, this person's account is locked, so I don't know whether she said anything else. It could be that there was, they were making comments specific comments, I don't know, but it's not, it just sounds like it was simply their presence that set everything off. The reason why that's kind of notable is we've seen a lot over the last year or so with kind of young, rabid, activist-y type people having a problem with customers on behalf of the company they work for, particularly people who work for, you know, in the social media department of a big business, kind of making decisions as to, you know, who they're going to serve, like basically what their policies and things are. A lot of this has involved trans people. I mean, we saw it with the co-op last year when they said they were pulling funds, they were pulling advertising from the Spectator, and that seemed to just be a decision of someone behind the keyboard running their social media. Except this is now moving beyond the social media, and it's now actually in pubs. And this isn't a specific trans issue as well. This is going to be much more widespread than that. You will soon see people who haven't really done anything wrong just being recognised. Maybe, you know, you said something on social media, maybe you haven't. If you're recognised and your views aren't completely kosher, there will be a rabid person behind the bar asking you to leave, or maybe kicking you out of a shop. I mean, we kind of get trickles of these things happening, but it's becoming more and more socially acceptable. That in itself is concerning. It's why that this is worth talking about, because the impression is simply they were kicked out for the views that they hold personally, and not specifically because of anything that they did. If they did anything specific, it would have been mentioned, but it hasn't been. Now, I thought before we end this video, we could look at some happy news, some good news. And in this channel's tradition, I decided that we should have a Seal of the Week featured in Trans Stupid for a change. And so this is this week's Seal of the Week. Look at him. Look at that seal. See, that is a premium top-notch seal. So thanks everyone for watching. I know it's been a long time since I did a video. So I really wanted to give a special thank you to the people who are supporting me on Patreon and Subscribestar during the time when I haven't been making a lot of videos. Like, I know that you didn't start watching my channel and supporting me because of seal of approval, it's because of stuff like this. And I want to make more videos now. I really, really appreciate the people who have stuck around. Even if like you weren't able to, it's completely understandable. Like, I don't do this for, you know, for money or anything like that. But like all of your support has meant a lot. But I'll be getting another video out soon. I'll try and go back to the Tuesday slot if I can. But until next time, thanks for watching.